Johnny Carson was not just a television host. For 3 decades, he was the final gatekeeper of American fame. If you were invited to sit across from him on The Tonight Show, your career could change overnight. If you failed to impress him, it could quietly stall just as fast. Millions of Americans ended their nights with Carson's voice, his timing, and his calm authority. What very few of them ever saw was how much power he held behind the scenes and how much wealth that power ultimately produced. When Johnny Carson died in 2005, the public knew him as a legend. What they didn't fully understand was how carefully he had built, protected, and eventually distributed one of the largest fortunes in entertainment history. To understand how that happened, it's necessary to go back to a time before late-night television, before studios, before NBC, and before Johnny Carson ever stepped onto a soundstage. He was born John William Carson on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa, and raised primarily in Norfolk, Nebraska. His father worked as a power company manager, and his mother stayed home with the children. It was a stable, modest household, far removed from Hollywood wealth or ambition. Carson showed an early fascination with performance, but not in the way most future entertainers did. He wasn't drawn to applause. He was drawn to control. At the age of 12, Carson purchased a mail-order magic kit after discovering a book on magic at a friend's house. He practiced relentlessly, not for fame, but for precision. By 14, he was performing as the Great Carsoni at local clubs, charging small fees and refining his ability to command attention without force. That skill, appearing relaxed while maintaining absolute control, would later define his entire career. World War II interrupted his education, and Carson enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1943. He trained under the Va-12 Navy College program and was commissioned as an ensign near the end of the war. He never saw combat, but his time in the military sharpened his discipline and confidence. He later joked that performing a card trick for the Secretary of the Navy was the highlight of his service. After the war, Carson attended the University of Nebraska, where he studied radio and speech, eventually graduating in 1949. He entered broadcasting at a moment when television was still finding its identity. In the early 1950s, Carson worked in radio and local television in Omaha and Los Angeles, slowly developing a persona that combined intelligence, restraint, and sharp timing. His rise was not explosive, it was methodical. By the mid-1950s, Carson had worked his way into national television, hosting a short-lived primetime variety show and later several game shows. It was during this period that he formed his professional partnership with Ed McMahon. More importantly, it was during these years that Carson learned how television economics actually worked. Hosts were visible, networks were powerful, ownership was rare. When Jack Paar stepped down from The Tonight Show in 1962, NBC offered the job to Carson. He initially hesitated, worried that interviewing celebrities night after night would expose his insecurities. Eventually, he accepted. On October 1, 1962, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, debuted. It quickly became something far larger than a television program. Carson's format, monologue, desk bits, interviews, and music, became the blueprint for late-night television. His influence reached beyond comedy. He controlled tone, he controlled pacing, he controlled exposure, and as the audience grew, so did his leverage. By the mid-1970s, The Tonight Show was generating more than $50 million per year in profits for NBC. Carson, recognizing his value, renegotiated. In 1975, his annual salary reached roughly $4 million, the equivalent of more than $23 million today. It made him the highest-paid television personality in the world. But Carson was not interested in being merely well-paid. In 1980, he made the most important financial decision of his career. Through Carson Productions, he negotiated ownership rights not only to The Tonight Show, but also to Late Night with David Letterman. This move transformed him from an employee into a power broker. He now earned money even when he wasn't on screen. Syndication, licensing, and back-end profits flowed quietly, consistently, and with minimal public visibility. By the time Carson approached retirement in the early 1990s, his annual salary had climbed to $25 million, the modern equivalent of nearly $57 million per year. Few entertainers in history had ever reached that level of sustained income, and yet Carson lived nothing like a typical celebrity. He avoided publicity, rarely gave interviews, and retreated from Hollywood whenever possible. His most significant asset was not a brand, it was privacy. That same instinct extended to his finances. He invested conservatively, accumulated assets patiently, and structured his wealth to operate without attention. After retiring in 1992, Carson disappeared almost entirely from public life. There were no comeback tours, no talk show appearances, no reinvention. He lived quietly, primarily at his oceanfront estate in Malibu, a striking modernist property designed by architect Ed Niles and perched above Little Doom Beach. The estate itself was a reflection of Carson's taste, controlled, elegant, and private. It included multiple residences, a private tennis pavilion gifted by NBC, guest houses, orchards, and sweeping ocean views. When the property was sold after his death, it fetched tens of millions of dollars and later became one of the most expensive celebrity estates ever listed in Malibu. Despite his enormous wealth, Carson's most consequential financial decision came after his death. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Carson quietly donated $1 to $2 million per year to the John W. Carson Foundation. Even the foundation's own directors believed this was the full extent of his giving. Then, in 2010, a routine IRS filing revealed the truth. Johnny Carson had left the foundation a bequest of more than $156 million. The gift included cash, securities, and royalty rights held within a trust that even those closest to the foundation had underestimated by nearly tenfold. Overnight, the foundation became the wealthiest celebrity-backed nonprofit in Hollywood, surpassing even David Geffen's charitable organization. The foundation's assets eventually grew beyond $200 million and continued to distribute more than $15 million annually to causes in education, healthcare, the arts, and environmental conservation. When Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005, at the age of 79, his total net worth was estimated at approximately $200 million, roughly $330 million in today's money. It was the result of 3 decades of dominance, ownership over content, disciplined investment, and an almost obsessive commitment to privacy and control. Johnny Carson never flaunted his fortune. He never explained it. He never defended it. He simply built it, protected it, and then, quietly, gave most of it away. And in doing so, he left behind not just a legacy of laughter, but one of the most carefully constructed financial empires in entertainment history.